The panel is here. Leigh Caldwell, co-author of the Washington Post's Early 202 and anchor of Washington Post Live. Brendan Buck, former advisor to House Speakers Paul Ryan and John Boehner. And Symone Sanders-Townsend, host of Symone and former chief spokesperson for Vice President Kamala Harris. Thanks to all of you for being here. I appreciate it. Leigh, I want to start with you. This is a huge test for President Biden, and obviously now the pressure's on to release the Americans. How is this playing for him politically, do you think?
Well, obviously it'll be great if Americans are released with as hostages. But my sources are saying that President Biden also doesn't get a lot of credit for his successes, not only on this, but on a whole host of things. So that does concern Democrats on Capitol Hill. But meanwhile, you have a divide, especially among the Democratic Party and among Americans, about the president's stances on Israel. And now you're seeing a lot of pressure from members of Congress, not only for a ceasefire, also for conditioning aid, as you also talked about, and also putting more public pressure on Netanyahu in the realms of this war. So it's still a very difficult situation for President Biden politically.
Symone, let's talk about some of this pressure that Leigh is describing. Your former boss, Senator Bernie Sanders, of course, you worked for him during his 26. I know you have. He wrote an op-ed that I referenced, but let me read a part of it. He says, if asking nicely worked, we wouldn't be in this position. The only way these necessary changes will happen is if the United States uses the substantial leverage we have with Israel. The blank check approach must end. Again, he is saying that any aid to Israel, as Leigh is saying, needs to be conditional. You heard National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan not rule out that the president would support such a deal.
Yeah, he didn't rule it out. I think having worked for President Biden, it's very important and not to understand where your contours are. But I think what Jake did say is that he believes the president has been vindicated in his strategy, which is what the president himself said when asked about this conditioning aid to Israel, and said it's a worthwhile conversation. But I think that if we had done that, I don't think we'd have gotten as far as we had gotten today. I think that the White House is very well aware, though, that conversations about conditioning aid to Israel are not just relegated to the most progressive parts of the Democratic Party apparatus. On Capitol Hill, there are moderate Democrats that are also engaging in these conversations. Senator Sanders on November 15th held a meeting amongst the Senate Democratic Caucus to talk about Israel and Hamas, brought in a number of different folks in that meeting, including Dennis Ross, who was a former peace negotiator for the Middle East region. And I think the question is, are these conversations going to turn to more legislative actions with more moderate members? And potentially they can, which is also why, again, Jake Sullivan left room this morning.
Yeah, it's a really great point. And Brendan, what's also so notable, that reference to a blank check is what we've heard from Republicans. Some Republicans who've said, we don't want to write a blank check to Ukraine. So there are divisions happening in both parties. And you just heard Congressman Turner say he's not confident that they can get this big, robust aid package done by the end of the year. How is this playing, broadly speaking? Yeah,
it's remarkable. In the immediate aftermath of the attack on Israel, it felt like it was just going to be a matter of days or weeks before aid was passed through Congress. And now here we are, and we're really no closer. And I do think it is that Ukraine aid that is the biggest holdup. There are clearly divisions on Israel, and what that looks like is an open question. But the president made a bet that he needed to use the leverage that he has on Israel to get funding for Ukraine, which has been stalling for a long time. And now that's become so complicated. And we hear a lot about a blank check and what the difference is between the two. I think the big difference is we've already spent $113 billion in Ukraine. And there's a lot of wariness to continue sending foreign aid. Foreign aid is never popular. But now Ukraine has gone on for so long. And the longer something sits out, the harder it is to pass.
And now they're tying it to border policy as well, an issue that Democrats and Republicans have not been able to agree on for decades. And so this entire package is really in jeopardy.
It's truly one of the most fraught issues, border policy. Leigh, let's talk about 2024 a little bit in domestic politics, if we could. President Biden obviously being tested on his handling of this foreign policy crisis, but also the economy, a top issue. He's been getting low marks. We have seen, though, as we head into the holidays, the rate of inflation is dropping. The rate of gas prices are dropping. And I'm hearing, based on my conversations, a lot of Democrats are saying his messaging needs to shift away from Bidenomics to really understanding Americans who say we're not feeling this yet.
Yeah, Bidenomics has really been kind of become a negative word, especially among Democrats, because it's not working. I was texting with some Democratic members of Congress last night, just trying to get a read over the holiday weekend, what they're hearing at home and what people are saying. And these members said that it is just not looking good for President Biden politically out there, that he would probably lose some swing states if the election were held today. So they have a lot of work to do to, once again, like I said, try to get credit for the successes that he's had over the past 2 years, which he keeps on getting blamed for everything bad that's happening.
I mean, this point Leanne is making is, I think that the Biden campaign also understands that. I spoke to Quentin Folks earlier this week, and I asked them, look, you spent a lot of money on ads, and they are at a record number investing in African-American and Latino ads. They've gone up earlier and deeper than any presidential campaign before. However, the door knocking and the organizing, the people organizing in communities has not ramped up yet. And I asked, when is that going to happen? Because the folks are not giving the president credit for things that they can feel. And I think Quentin noted to me, he said, look, I understand that, and we are hoping to get people on the ground as soon as possible in the early new year. So it is something that I also think the campaign is looking at.
Quentin, of course, is with the campaign. What's so interesting about that, we've seen the president's poll numbers really drop among those key groups, including voters of color. Brendan, let's talk about Republicans. The Iowa Caucuses, 50 days away, starting today, by the way. Mark your calendars. Can Nikki Haley catch up to Trump? He was in South Carolina last night. He was in her state. He's beating her in her state, but she says she can take it. She's very confident, she says. But can she?
Well, she's clearly run the best campaign of anybody, not Donald Trump. She has asserted herself in the debates. She has shown herself to be serious and understand the issues. The problem is she's still very far behind, and you have a divided other half of the party. And I think as long as someone named Ron DeSantis is still in this race, it's very hard for her to get there. Now, Donald Trump is below 50% in Iowa, generally in the polls. And if an incumbent is below 50%, you typically think of them as vulnerable. And I consider Donald Trump really the incumbent here. The problem is no one has been able to figure out an attack on Donald Trump that sticks. We've had millions and millions of dollars run on him, and none of them have really worked. If she can figure that out, perhaps, but she's got a long, long way to go.
Yeah, she sure does. Symone, you've been in the trenches in campaigns that are underdog campaigns. Do you think Nikki Haley can come back? She's had 3 strong debate performances. Her poll numbers are shooting up, but she's still double digits behind Trump.
Yeah, look, I think the fact that there are so many other candidates in the race and the race has not winnowed is something that is not playing to Nikki Haley's advantage. Now, the question is, if Ron DeSantis ends up dropping out, do his voters go to Nikki Haley? And I think the data suggests that they do not, that those voters go to Donald Trump. And so it is probably advantageous for Nikki Haley for Ron DeSantis to continue to stay in this race. I think what's so interesting about her campaign to me is that she's been very clear on a number of things, how she feels Ukraine, foreign aid, right, the deficit, right? But she's a little not as clear about what she thinks when it comes to abortion. And I think you're going to have to get a more concrete answer as it goes on.
But we need to create a dynamic where it is not just someone running for second place. And I think that people are dismissing the DeSantis-Haley as who's running for second. If DeSantis gets out and it is just truly 2 candidates, I think that will change the perception of the race. Still a long shot for her to win, but I think that is a necessary thing. And I think all these big dollar donors who are rushing to Nikki Haley also need to be working to get DeSantis to drop.
That could be a game changer if he did. Leanne, let me ask you this. Over on the Democratic side, the big X factor, will there be a third-party candidate? Senator Manchin told me he's not ruling it out, but he's just acknowledged it would be uphill.
And he's known that it would be uphill, but he is not ruling it out. He's supposed to do a listening tour of some states in the coming months, but that hasn't also been announced yet, and he is running out of time. But if Joe Manchin does get in with RFK Jr., Cornel West, it could be a little bit interesting.
All right, great conversation, you guys. Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.